Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I do see a couple of names on the list that I do not recognize, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I am Tracy with the State Library. I'm the lead consulting and learning librarian, which means I am a working consultant like Kara Orban and Corey Sloan, and I serve those libraries that are in Eastern Montana, answering questions, doing strategic planning and trainings. And then I also oversee our consulting services, continuing education, lifelong learning. And over the years, I've become the one kind of responsible for funding and for governance. And so as we're working our way through this roadmap, I became the one to do this particular section of the roadmap. So, as many of you know, because I think some of you have been attending our monthly series, we've been going through each section of the elective roadmap, just sharing information about it, about what we were thinking, about what the task force who created this roadmap was thinking when it was designed. And then, where possible, we had your peers working with us to talk about the ways that they implemented these sections of the roadmap. What I found when I was preparing for this particular session is we didn't really have anyone who chose this part of the roadmap. And I'm not sure if that's just because, well, governance and funding are important, but maybe not as exciting as programming and library services, or if the items we have on the roadmap are maybe a little bit too much of a stretch. And so I'm approaching this section of the roadmap a little bit differently. I will go over what's on this section and a little bit of what we were trying to do, but I am hoping that you will be comfortable chatting with me about whether or not we need to make some changes. This is a living document, so we can change it. The thinking behind it was to provide some ideas for stretch goals for libraries, but maybe these are just a little bit too much. And so I would love your feedback on that. And then it's gonna be a random stump Tracy, because my next question for you will just be, what questions do you have about governance and funding? And we'll talk about those items, and then I'll share some resources we have in this area, and then I'll turn it over to Colette to talk a little bit about what's coming up next. So what you're seeing is a screenshot of the 2 pages of the roadmap that are about this particular item of library structure and financing. The first is for those of you who are visual and like the rock cairn, and the right-hand image is for those of you who prefer that more of a spreadsheet linear flow to it. Basically, the thinking behind this is libraries really need stable funding and a solid structure. And having that allows you to offer the library services your community members need or want. And so the items on this particular roadmap were things that we have found in other states or even with your peers in Montana have been helpful for them to have that stable funding and that structure. And so it would ask you to look at things like different governance models, like an independent library district versus a city or county library system. It encouraged you to perhaps work with others to advocate for funding for libraries. It also recommended leveraging your local revenue sources by participating in collaborative projects, which can be a bigger investment with time, but often will save you money and provide more robust services for your community members. And then the last one, the 90% of local tax revenue fund support services, the thinking behind that was just simply property taxes in particular, but local taxes in general tend to be a more stable funding source. So they don't have really big swings up and down. It often doesn't matter what's going on with the economy. They tend to just be a reliable source that you can turn to when you need to provide these services. And so these were the ideas that we created and placed on this particular part of the roadmap. But as I mentioned, no one selected these. And so I'm wondering if it's just because it needs updating, because maybe these aren't the right things, or maybe these are too far out there, too hard to do. And so that's why I wanted to get the feedback of this group. And so my first question for you is, given that the purpose of this section of the roadmap is that stable funding and that stable structure for the library, what changes would you like to make to this section of the roadmap? And I will stop sharing so that I can pull up the chat, and we can unmute you and allow you to speak. So um, certainly we can do that, or you can use chat and I can take notes. And if you want to speak, you can just raise your hand too. Thanks, Colette. It's perfectly okay to say we have no suggestions, by the way. That was kind of a big question to throw at you.
Tracy, do you want to display that question again, just so folks have it
Yeah,
in front of them?
absolutely. So, what changes would you like to make? Or let me ask you this, if maybe this would be a helpful thing to do to think of this differently. What are you currently doing, or what have you explored in the past to try and get uh, more stable funding for the library? Right. So mill levy, okay. Fundraising ideas, a friends group. Just curious, how many of you have a friends group? If you don't mind putting in the chat, that might be helpful. Oh, a new foundation. Okay, so Mars City County has is it a friends or a foundation or both, Rachel? Okay, so Bitterroot Public has both. Mar County has a friends. Joliet has a friends. Sharing a county levy. Friends under the foundation. That's actually can be a really great combo for small libraries. So what I'm seeing is there's a need for more fundraising ideas, possibly a need for help with friends or foundation, um, and then potentially mill levies. This is very helpful. I realize I asked you kind of a deep thinking question in the morning, but I just felt like maybe we didn't have this section of the roadmap quite right. So you'll be going for mill levy this year. Is anyone else going for a mill levy this year? Or maybe within the next 18 months. Okay, thanks, Coley. All right, thank you for sharing that. Um, I will work with Kara and Corey, and we will kind of take a look at that part of the roadmap, that library finances and governance structure, and maybe tweak it a bit to better reflect some of what you added in here as well. And if you think of anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us and just share your ideas, because I really want this to be inspiring and also doable. And if you think of something as we're going through the webinar, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat. So my next question for you, since I don't have any panelists to talk about this particular part of the roadmap, is there anything in particular that you would like to learn about library structure? When I say library structure, what I'm really talking about is, for instance, nationally and a little bit too in Montana, what we found is independent library districts tend to weather economic storms and just some of the politics that can be present when you're working in local government. They tend to navigate those a little bit better, and so that's why we had added this idea of looking at independent library districts. But they are a heavy lift for sure. And so library structure, when I'm talking about that, I am talking about the governance model for the library, how it's legally formed. So would you like to know more about how libraries can be created, or is there a particular part of the financial part of running a library that you would like to know about? And so you can just post your questions in chat. I just wanted to give you a chance, if you came here maybe with a specific question that you would like us to discuss, we can talk about that. You can also make it really easy on me. Any questions? The pros and cons of an MOU with your local government. That's definitely a good one. So some libraries have entered into a memorandum of understanding with the local government, and usually these cover things like who's going to be responsible for making who's going to be responsible for doing maintenance on the library, how is the accounting and HR going to be handled, uh, who's going to be responsible for making certain decisions, who's going to be responsible for signing contracts and so forth. And the pros of that is it does help outline who's responsible for what. And a lot of what goes into an MOU is kind of behind the scenes stuff that needs to be done, but isn't necessarily flashy and exciting. And so that can be really helpful for instance, for taking care of the facility or for managing payroll, accounting, and HR. The cons of a memorandum of understanding is it's not a it's a contract, and it is binding, and yet it is not as binding as the law. And so what we have found is some libraries enter into an MOU, and it it doesn't really change practice per se. So it doesn't really seem to fix the problem of the facilities and accounting or payroll or so forth. Um, and that's a disadvantage of it. It's I think actually one of the pros of it is it does encourage the library board and the library director and local government officials to talk to each other about how these things are going to be managed, how the funding is going to be managed, and so forth. I just would caution you that they don't always have the results that I think that library boards and directors want when they go into it, which is a guaranteed course of action where everybody knows their responsibilities and everybody follows through on it. Kara and Corey, would you like to talk about the pros and the cons? Anything that I'm missing? Because I know the two of you might have worked with other libraries, and then I'll answer your question, Cole. But I just want
Let's
to give.
I
Oh,
would just say, just to if you have an MOU to review it. Um,
yes, good point.
Sometimes questions might be answered in the MOU, but sometimes MOUs might be dated, and not necessarily followed, even though you have it. Um, my piece of advice about an MOU.
No, that's excellent, Corey. They do get outdated.
One thing that came up at the Pathfinder meeting last week, when we were talking about facilities management and having some kind of agreement with local government, was some people were hesitant to, kind of like, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
So, so they were hesitant to bring things up that would cause the local government to scrutinize, like, hey, why aren't you paying for this and that? Why are we paying for that? So I think it might depend on your relationship with your local government, and does that need some work before you're ready to negotiate a more formal agreement?
Yeah, that's a really great point. It is actually, it really just depends on your situation. You know, if you have a good working relationship, that's actually the time to do an MOU. Um, because if you don't have one, you might want to develop that first, for the reasons that Kara listed. It just sometimes can backfire. An MOU is different from an interlocal agreement. An interlocal agreement is a legal binding document, and interlocal agreements can only actually be entered into by cities, counties, or school districts or other special districts. A city or county library board can sign an interlocal agreement, but they cannot enter into an interlocal agreement. That is something that happens between two subdivisions of government. And typically, when we see those, that's a particular structure of a library, of which the Bitterroot Public Library is one, that I know of on this call. But in essence, it literally creates the library in those situations. Typically, what has happened is community members have voted to create this governance structure and have dedicated funding for it. And so the interlocal agreement establishes that. It establishes how much money the library will receive. It establishes how library board members will be appointed. And it usually also establishes the powers that that library board has as well. Okay, I'm gonna look at Jennifer's question here. I will look to see what we have, but if our county building needs a new roof and there are multiple offices, does this come out of our budget if we're on the top floor, or is it divided out? Oh, that's a great question, Jennifer. Uh, I would say the ideal is that it's shared amongst the different departments because, you know, while you might be the one who feels the hurt the most if the roof starts leaking, the fact is having a good roof on the building is good for everyone in the building. Now, having said that, I would say, if the library is the primary resident of the building, I have seen counties or cities have the library pay for the roof out of the library's budget. But it's definitely something worth the library board negotiating with the county and or the other departments in there. Just saying, hey, could we have some kind of split where maybe, the library pays for its percentage of the square footage and then you pay for your square footage of the percentage of the roof costs. I would certainly consider asking about that. But that would the roof being replaced, we actually had a library where the city took it out of the library's budget and we kind of determined it was a health and safety issue. And that was something that the city could do. But obviously, ideally, they would talk to you first before doing something like that. Any other questions about this topic? Anything else you want to learn? Go ahead, Nikki, if you can. Cole unmuted people, so.
Am I there?
You are.
Hi. Oh, I think there's two of us too close together. Does that sound terrible on your end too?
It does. It echoes, although I
Hold on
can
a second.
understand you. Yeah, that'd be great if you could mute one.
I'm gonna send you a thank you note. Make sure you.
Okay, I'm back.
All right.
You guys see me, but. So we have an interlocal agreement and the city in the agreement is tasked with providing the maintenance for the building and upkeeping like the yard and things like that. So unfortunately, we're kind of caught in the middle in that the city is not doing those things because they say that they don't have any money, which I'm in Plains, it's probably true. And the commissioners are quite frustrated with me because they feel like I need to force their hand somehow and make them follow the agreement. And yet the agreement is not between me and them, it's between the county and them. So I have no other question other than, do you have any advice?
You know, it's funny that because Nikki, I think you were at the fall workshop, and I think about like, really, you are correct. The agreement is between the county and the city. And so the ideal situation after you tried to talk to the city would be to reach out perhaps to a county commissioner that you have a good relationship with and just say, these are the circumstances. The city has no money. And I have tried to kind of get them to do the work. Would you be willing to sit down and talk with them about how to make this happen or how to solve this problem, or even invite, the mayor and a county commissioner and you and your board chair could sit down with them and just say, okay, this isn't getting done. How can we solve this problem? And maybe working it out together. I am sorry, because that is a tough situation that you are in. And I don't know if that's super helpful, but maybe if you got them in the room together and there weren't accusations and it was more like, okay, here's the problem. How do we solve it? Maybe,
Right.
but that's hard. And I don't know, Kara, if you have anything you would like to add to that.
The tricky bit is one of our commissioners used to be the mayor, so he's convinced that there is money.
Oh,
And so, I have to decide how much of a award that I want the library to turn into between the county and the city. And you know how hard we've worked to create peace.
yes, I do.
And so I guess the first step that I'm taking at this point is to just get a general inspection of the building and kind of that way I have black and white. It's not just my opinion that we need a new roof. It's not just my opinion that the electrical is in a terrifying situation because we trip breakers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's black and white by somebody who knows what they're talking about. So hopefully start presenting those things and start asking, I get that they're not gonna be able to pay for it today, but let's, plan some sort of plan. And then also
Yeah.
probably going to have to,
Recording in progress.
oh, can you turn that off for a second? Probably have to, sorry. Probably have to agree that the library is gonna have to fundraise at least some of the money and just accept you can't get blood out of a turnip.
Yes, and that might help too. Is just, can we have some sort of mutual, maybe the city provides a little bit, you provide a little bit, and the county provides a little bit. I do think that's wise. And just for the sake of everyone on this call, it's actually very helpful to have an engineer or a building inspector. I've heard of libraries who have someone locally who will do that work for them. Somebody who has building experience to come in and take a look at what you have and to give you advice on what needs to be done to upgrade it. That is very helpful to have. It's helpful for you just in terms of planning what needs to happen, but also, as you're saying, Nikki, to be able to show to your city and county, like, this is the stuff that really needs to happen. And let's work together to figure out how to make it happen. Coley had asked if it's advisable to have legal review or involvement when drafting an MOU, and when should you get an attorney involved? It is always nice to have an attorney take a look at it. There are now, I think, enough examples of MOUs out there that have been reviewed by attorneys that we could share with you. And so I think starting with your situation and entering the correct parties, you would have a very solid template. And so all you would need is for the attorney to just take a look at it and make sure that nothing had changed kind of at the very end of the process. And then Colette shared our recent webinar. Does anyone else have any questions related to this topic that you would find helpful to talk about? There's just some very good questions. Rachel, go for it.
So our interlocal agreement hasn't been updated since 1990.
Ooh.
So I'm working, since we're a county city, I need both city and county attorneys working on it, but getting them to communicate has been difficult. So that's not really my question, but my question is there something that the state has kind of like a template of making sure we hit things? Since ours is so old, I don't want anything to be, skipped over on accident.
Mhm.
Is there anything that the state offers as kind of a guideline for that?
We do actually have some sample interlocal agreements. And what's interesting about interlocal agreements is there is Montana code annotated that literally says what has to be in an interlocal agreement. And I do not have that code memorized off the top of my head. It's in Title VII, but I will look it up and email it to you, Rachel.
Okay, thank
And
you.
that will help. And then I'll work with Corey to get you some examples that you can take a look at as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It almost sounds like it would be helpful for us to maybe do something about interlocal agreements and MOUs. Oh, thanks, Coley. And I assume, Mary, you were saying, yes, please, to something about interlocal agreements and MOUs and the difference between them. Just want to make sure I was taking notes. All right, awesome. We can certainly do that if people would find that helpful. All right, so last call. Does anyone else have any questions you want to ask about this topic? The questions make it interesting, so truly, if you do have a question, please don't hesitate to ask. All right. So we've actually talked about a fair number of these. I I tend to focus more on the stable funding because I think that's really what we're seeking. Is just the money to be able to provide library services. And so these are some different pathways that other libraries have used. A couple of you mentioned this. Libraries are one of the entities that can ask their community to pay more taxes for library services. And I think for most of you on this call, the Montana Code annotated that I've cited 22-1-304, that is where you can find out about that. And in essence, you can either have a petition process where you petition your community members to put an initiative on the ballot, or your city or your county commission can pass a resolution and actually go ahead and put it on the ballot for you. Most of the time, your local government officials will want you to go the petition route. And while it is more work, it's not a bad thing. It actually allows you to educate people about the mill levy and why the library needs it. And it's frankly a really good test of whether or not an initiative would pass. So this is definitely an option for you. And the difference between it and other funding sources is a lot of libraries in Montana, what happens is the local government has a big pool of funds called the general fund, and they give libraries a portion of that money. Well, that local government, the city council or the county commission, they set the budget for that. And they get to decide the priorities for that. And so, if they have different priorities, or they need the funding for other reasons, or the funding goes down, the library can see a budget cut. But if you have a dedicated mill levy where your people have said we'll pay more taxes for libraries, you receive that funding because that is what the community wants. And so that's why it's actually a very stable source of funding for you. The other options, becoming an independent library district or a multi-jurisdictional service district library, are about changing the governance structure. However, they also lead to more stable funding. The independent library district is a heavier lift. We have 4 of them in Montana. The way that we know that you are an independent library district, one of the most obvious ways, is that your board members are elected, whereas in every other type of library, board members are appointed. There are some other nuances that make an independent library district what it is. The fact that the library owns its own property and has both the, I guess, joy of being responsible for everything and the concern of the being responsible for everything. The multi-jurisdictional service district option is an option that is a kind of a nice mix of both, quite frankly. The nice thing about city or county libraries is your boards are appointed. Typically, your city or your county handles your accounting and your payroll and your HR, or they at least will help you with that. Whereas in an independent library district, you're doing all of that on your own. With a multi-jurisdictional service district, you have your city and your counties usually helping you with that accounting and payroll and HR. However, you have a dedicated funding source and you have a fair amount of autonomy. And so that's what makes that a more attractive option. And there are a number of libraries in Montana who have chosen this. The other thing that's nice about that multi-jurisdictional service district option is a lot of you who are city libraries perhaps, or you're in a county with multiple libraries, you don't just serve your town. You probably serve an area that goes outside the city boundaries. And with a multi-jurisdictional service district, you can follow school district boundaries, for instance, or weed or conservation districts, and that will be your source of tax funds as well. So that's definitely an option for you. Many of you mentioned that you are looking at a Friends or a foundation, or you rely on them. And those of you who have one know that these can be a great source of additional funding, but typically your friends or your foundation even, they want to do fun stuff, or they want to be a part of a major remodel or a new building. And so they typically aren't a good source for that, paying the internet bill or paying salaries or the utilities for the library, but they certainly can augment the services that a library provides. And then many of you mentioned grants as well. Does anyone have another funding source that they've used since I can't remember who, but somebody asked about fundraising ideas for small libraries, and then I'll take a look at the chat and see if there are any other questions. But if any of you have other sources you've used, please feel free to share. And I'll just take a look here. No. Yeah, Laura, that'd be great. Does anyone else have a funding source not listed on here that you found helpful? Oh, thank you, Kara. Oh, that's a nice one. Dinner theater. There are some really neat fundraising ideas out there. I know a number of you have sort of regular grant sources that you turn to as well. And that, of course, can be an option, although these are interesting times, so I know that that's also a little bit tougher. If any of you do have a cool fundraising idea or something that worked well for you, please feel free to post it in the chat. I think that your peers always find it helpful, especially if you have a fundraising idea that isn't a ton of work for the director and your volunteers. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and actually show you where we have some resources that you might find helpful. And I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm actually going to start from the State Library's homepage. And up here under Services to Libraries, if you click on Library Development, we have all of the different links for you. And under Public Library Consulting Services in particular, kudos to Kara and Corey. They have helped me over the years really add to this particular collection. And you can see we have library budget and finance. And so a lot of what we have talked about today are resources from this particular section. Like Kara just shared the guidelines for mill levy elections, and she is updating this document. So this walks you through the process. It walks you through a timeline. It walks you through what to expect and what you might do. And we share tips from other libraries. And many of your peers have gone through a mill levy election, and they are often willing to share their advice and what worked for them. We also have these budget and finance video tutorials, which are designed to just be really quick online videos that walk you through particular aspects of what local funding sources there are, what state funding sources there are. And then we have a financial management best practices, which is just really about managing your money currently and what local government services and the Montana Association of Counties and the Montana League of Cities and Towns, what they recommend. And we worked with them to create that financial management best practices. For those of you who do have maybe older buildings, or you're just thinking ahead to when you are going to need a new roof or new carpet or something like that, a library depreciation reserve fund can be a great way to steadily put aside money to pay for those larger ticket items. And this handbook walks you through what a depreciation reserve fund is and how you would set one up. And then we have this library district's information guide for anyone who might be willing to explore that particular option. That tells you what they are, the pros and cons of them, and then it literally walks you through the process of setting one up. We also talk about budget and finances in our trustee handbook and our library director manual. And then for a deeper dive, you can take our MSL Learn course, which goes into a lot more detail about budget and finance. And then we link to the Local Government Budget Act because that impacts all of you. The other resource that you have is, of course, Kara, Corey, and I. We are happy to answer your questions, and we'll also lead trainings specifically for you and your library board if you're trying to learn about your different revenue sources and your different options as well. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and take a look at the chat here. Oh, thank you for sharing that, Kara. Is there anything else? Any other resource that you would like me? Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear that, Mary. Yeah. Kara is a great resource herself. All right. So that was kind of all I had today. Like I mentioned, I just felt like maybe we don't have quite the right stretch things on this elective roadmap. So I took notes when you were telling me about the different things you do, and I will get with Kara and Corey and we'll maybe update that section of the roadmap to make it a little more realistic. And then thank you for your great questions about the structure and finances. I do think it always makes it more interesting to get your questions and to hear from others as well. And I'll follow up with a couple of you that had questions that involve a little bit more work. If you think of anything, either any changes or any questions you want to ask, please don't hesitate to reach out to Kara, Corey, and I. If there's a resource that we're missing that you think would be really helpful, do let us know. We typically will work on those during the winter when we're not traveling quite so much, and we always want to create something that will be of assistance to you. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Colette and let her kind of finish up. And I'll stop sharing, Colette, so you can share your screen if you'd like.
Be here. Apologies, my voice is a little bit froggy. Tracy was sharing this, and so just to kind of wrap up for today, I did want to let you know that we have this whole series of webinars that are based on the roadmap that are now self-paced, self-contained courses. And so if you have a colleague or trustee or staff member who is interested in one of these topics, you can always watch the recordings of the webinar, but what I've done is to create these courses that are not just the recording, but discussion questions, summaries of the key points in that. And so it just provides a little bit more context, especially for those who didn't join the webinars live. So I'll be adding today's webinar to this list along with the recording to our YouTube channel. And I encourage you to take a look at those offerings. You can always take a look as a guest. You don't have to log in and enroll, but I think it's just a little bit different way with a little bit more context if you haven't been able to join the live webinars. So take a look at that. I will share the link to MSL Learn. And then, as always, we appreciate hearing from you and getting your comments and thoughts about the content of our webinars. We love to hear from you, and we love to learn from what you have to say about the work that we're doing. So please take a few moments just to give us that feedback. Greatly appreciate it. And as Tracy said, reach out. Our consultants are here to help you, to be your partner in brainstorming and thinking and getting a pulse on what's going on in other libraries. And so you can always reach out to Kara, Tracy, and Corey as you need help with different things. We do have one more webinar in this series, and that is scheduled for November 4th at noon, and it is the last section on planning and evaluation. I love planning and evaluation myself, so I am very excited that this is the way that we're going to kind of wrap things up for this series. So thank you, Laura. Appreciate the vote of confidence and that and recommendation. Really appreciate that. So with that, thank you, everybody. We really love it when you join us for these webinars. and look forward to hearing from you before too much longer. Everybody who attended the live session, I'll be adding your credits to Aspen for today's webinar. So go ahead in the next day or so, check your record and make sure that I got you entered as a live participant today. So with that, thanks so much, and we hope that you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.